Mission Chats with John Crow.
Welcome back to Mission Chats, and I thank you so much for tuning in again. And today I am excited to introduce you to a good friend, someone who I've looked up to for many years, and someone with a wealth of experiences and also stories. So this should be a fun one. So Randy Grebe, thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this little podcast. And as I usually start these conversations, I would just love for you to just share with our listeners your story, how the Lord called you into missions and how He's led you through that over the years to this point in your life.
Wow. Well, thank you, John. And when you reached out to me to see if we can make this happen, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
The legendary John Crow is asking me to be part of his podcast. So, wow, I'm honored.
Wow.
And immediately,
I was thinking the exact same thing. Randy will make time for this. He's always so busy in so many different things. And here you are. So praise the Lord.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hearing your name and seeing you on screen there, I just so fondly remember our times together, you and Holly.
Mm-hmm.
And the boys, of course, were really little back then, but just starting our ship ministry journey with you guys on the Logos Hope. I mean, we could spend a couple hours just on that, and
Sure.
probably won't. We'll probably focus more on the ministry that Kim and I founded before we moved on the ship. But I just think of those years together and so many God stories, it was just overwhelming. It was just nonstop. I mean, like, I think the very first one, I'm sure you remember the brother from Faroe Islands. We had just opened the ship and we were training everybody how to give tours of the ship.
Right.
We all had to learn that. And he was engineer from the Faroe Islands, and God called him to be an engineer, not a tour guide, know. So when we called him up to say, it's your turn to do the tour, I don't want to do that, Randy. I came here to work with the engine. That's my God-given call, and I'm not going to do anything else. Well, today you're going to give a tour because that's what we're going to all do together. And he huffed and gruffed and came up out of the engine room, stood there, waited for 20 minutes, and no one came on a tour. See, he says, Uncle Randy, can I go back to the engine room? I said, okay, I'll let you go, but I'm going to call you when the first person comes, And so sure enough, along comes a Chinese gal, and she knew no English. So I called him out of the engine room. He's huffing, puffing. I don't want to do this. So I'll find a Chinese speaker to do the tour. Yeah, why don't they do the tour? I said, no, you do the tour. So he did the tour, walked around the ship, this Chinese gal, having translated. An hour and a half later, I get a call in the office. Uncle Randy, you got to come down to the engine room. So I went down, and there he is, eyes watered, emotional. He says, you won't believe what happened today. So what happened? He says, that Chinese lady, I took her on a tour, and at the end of the tour, she said, I want to become like you people on the ship. You people are filled with Jesus. I want to invite Jesus in my heart. Yeah. And he led that soul to Christ through being translated through Chinese, and he was never the same. He was never the same, And those are just some of the very early stories I remember, but there are many, many more. Mm-hmm. For Kim and I, it's, when you're called into mission, it's a little bit different for everyone, I think,
right?
Because God calls us at different times and seasons of our life. And for me, I mean, I wouldn't say I was called, but I became very interested in mission at a young age because there was a missionary who attended just a little Baptist church where my mother grew up. I'm half Baptist because of my mom.
Okay.
And so Ruby would tell these amazing stories. She was feeding starving people in Africa and Sudan and different places and up in the north. And she'd show these pictures. And I just thought, man, I want to do something like that in my life, to do something that's worth it,
Yeah.
And then she left, and years later, she'd give another update. And so as a small church, we prayed, we gave, missionaries would come. And John, I can tell you honestly, I never really wanted to be a missionary. To me, they were strange people.
Right.
They drove old rusty cars. They talk funny, not realizing they had different accents from different languages, They were just kind of strange people. But they held me on my seat telling their stories of God's stories. And I thought, well, my life is pretty boring compared to that. So then I met Kim in high school years, and we both were very interested. Did short-term mission trips. Then we started leading short-term mission trips. I was working at the family business, and then never took a vacation. Our vacations were always mission trips.
Right.
And we started leading them into the Caribbean, basically, not far, English speaking, and ended up in Nassua, Bahamas.
Yeah.
And again, it's a whole nother story how we ended up there. But Yeah, back in 1986, that was 39 years ago. We left the family business, moved down there, and went into primarily, I was evangelist in the schools. I did a lot of work in the schools there,
Yeah.
sharing the gospel, and had my little talking bird. I don't know if you remember my bird's name. He's still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dodo. I was saying I met a guy in the Bahamas a few weeks ago. He looked at me, he said, "Are you Uncle Randy?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Is your bird still alive?" I mean, this guy's he looked like he's in his 50s, you know?
Right.
When I was a little kid, you come in my school and you had that bird would talk, and I said, "Yeah, it's still alive because they think it's alive. It's just a puppet, you know?" And he says, "Well, what are you feeding that bird?"
Right. Oh,
Anyway,
that's so great.
so that began the whole mission journey. I mean, there's so many pieces to that puzzle, scriptures, people guiding us, people counseling us. I mean, the list could go on, but it was a journey, and once we went, we never turned back. And now all these years later, and many many countries, and basically every region of the world,
Right.
every major religion in the world. I've shared the gospel in like 119 countries of the world,
Wow. Yeah.
and these are countries with other types of democracies, whether it's communism or whether it's a Buddhist country or Hindu or Islamic,
Right.
all these major world religions,
Mhm.
being able to share the gospel, reach out to the people in those nations. It's overwhelming.
Right. Yeah. No, I know
Mm,
you've had an amazing wealth of experiences, and like you were sharing, started in the Bahamas, I think, and then
yeah.
many years with the ship ministry that I was a part of as well. Of course, the Lord's used that to take you and your ministry and your passion for life and your passion for the Lord all around the world. And yeah, definitely that's something that sticks out for me as I think of Uncle Randy. It's just your amazing example, and yeah, just kind of. I think your one of your sayings was just show up, and I
Yes.
mean, we might get to that as we go, but that always stood out to me. Just just be there and see what the Lord's going to use you for, and just a huge influence in my life. Yeah, and thinking about, your time on the ship, like you said at the beginning, I'm sure there was probably 101 different stories, we that you could share and that would be a huge encouragement. But maybe there's one or two of those that sticks out that we could talk about at this part of our conversation, and then we will kind of shift the focus back to
Sure.
the things you're really moving forward now. But yeah, I just want to hear a story or two. It's always an encouragement.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, you mentioned just show up. I've got the workings, kind of the basic thoughts behind the book,
Okay.
just show up. And
Yeah.
Kim and I just came back from England. We had 14 speaking engagements there over 2 weeks. So we were busy just about every day.
Oh.
And I took my hat to show up, and it's still in the suitcase. Otherwise I would have brought that out to you. But
Yeah.
I did take this along on one of the first stories. And I've kept this all the way back from when we opened the ship. It was very early on in the Caribbean. You were actually there.
Yeah.
But I was walking through the ship, and there was this piece of shoe laying on the floor, and I picked it up. And because it's got a heel on, I thought, well, it's got to be a lady's shoe.
Right.
And if the lady's walking around the ship and she's missing this piece of shoe with the heel, she's got to be limping.
Right.
So I walked the opposite way, and I thought, I got to find a limping lady.
Right.
So I'm walking through, looking down at everyone's feet, everyone's shoe, went all the way through the ship. We were in Trinidad, and there's thousands of people,
Right.
and I'm carrying this piece of shoe with me, and I don't find a limping lady.
Right.
I found some limping ladies, but they both had they had shoes on,
Yeah.
So anyway, I got all the way around the ship, and then I stopped and I thought to myself, I do have a sense of humor, but I thought to myself, you know what this is? This actually is a core value of mission, and what it really is a lost soul.
Right. Yeah.
So I hold up this piece of shoe with the heel,
Yeah.
and it is the sole of a shoe, and it is a lost soul. And I do keep that and remind myself that in the mission field, we can get so busy doing stuff and things that are all important.
Yeah.
Seriously. Been in many different types of ministries and visited many different, from villages of the world to palaces of the world, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mission is still about lost souls, and
Yeah.
it's about discipling them as well. And I've always kept that to kind of remind myself
Yeah.
of the importance of the gospel.
Yeah.
It's really what we do.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, The other kind of simple story here, just simple stories, but wow, they just stay in your heart and soul. The day we had rolled into Sierra Leone,
Mhm.
an elderly man walked on board. Kim and I are right down there by the welcome desk, and there was thousands of people. Like they were just lining up. You know how that was. There's still average of 4,500 people a day come
Right.
on the ship, 1,000,000 people a year.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming. But this day, it was near the end of the visit, and an old man walks on. He was perspiring, and
Mhm.
I asked him, "How you doing?" And he spoke English. He says, "Well, I'm kind of tired." I
Mm.
said, "Well, you look like you've been out in the sun." He says, "Young man," he says, "I've been walking 4 days to get to your ship."
Wow.
I said, 4 days. I said, if I walked a half a day, I'd be in the hospital or in a wheelchair or something. And I said, 4 days. He says, "Yeah, I live up in the mountains."
Mm.
Came from the mountains. I said, "What do you do up in the mountains?" And he says, "Well, I'm a pastor and I pastor 7 different churches. I go to a different village 1 day a week.
Wow.
And I have 7 villages. I pastor 7 churches."
Yeah.
I said, "Wow, that is amazing. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you.
Mhm.
How can I help you?" And he pulls out of his pocket a pocket testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, a little Bible. It fits in your top pocket.
Yep.
He says, "Well, I hear you're the book ship and you have Bibles." He says, "I've never had a Bible.
Wow.
All I have is this pocket testament,
Mm.
and I've come to get a Bible."
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, brother, follow me. Trust me again." You've ever seen those pictures of Santa Claus or the bag full of gifts? That's what he looked like walking. It probably took him 2 weeks to get
Yeah,
home.
right.
But I always think
Wow.
of that elderly man and the passion he had for the work he was doing up there in the mountains.
Yeah.
And there we were helping him with Bibles and encouraging him. And I thought, wow, how many people would walk that far? How many other in that line had
Right.
come long distances to be on the ship? So it really humbled us and again made us think that, wow, God is really working and every one of these souls is important.
Yeah.
And it was impossible to meet all of them every day. But I think the encouragement is for all of us to just show up. Actually, if you could just make one person a day, just bring a smile to their face in the name of Jesus and share the love of Christ somehow with them, I think the whole planet would be different. But unfortunately, most people don't know their neighbors. They know the good neighbors,
Right.
but they say, "Oh, those bad guys, I don't know their name. They beat up their wife and kick the dog and drink all night, and I don't know them, but they're the very ones that actually need Jesus." So
Right. Yeah.
anyway, those are just a couple
Yeah.
short stories. There's longer ones for sure.
Right. No, that's great. Well, yeah, I really wanted to give you an opportunity to share about the ministry in the Bahamas. And as you mentioned,
Okay.
that was something that you and Kim brought to life, as it were, with the Lord's leading. And I know you've sort of come full circle and that you're focused there again in this season. So I'd love to hear kind of how did that begin? What did that look like early on? If you'd like to share a story or two. But yeah, then also we'll look at where it's up to today and what opportunities there could be there as well.
Yeah, well, I think just to reconfirm, I'm actually serving with both ministries. I'm
Mhm.
still full time
Yeah.
with OM Chips. I'm a senior field advisor for them and travel speak, do fundraising with them, but then also living in Nassau, restarting this thing. We do have staff there. We actually just opened our planetarium, and
Okay.
director came back. He's directed that for 19 years, so he's back. We've had just since March, we had over 900 students come through there, so we're up and running. But middle of last year, I would say about a year ago, we just moved back and was starting to restart. And I got a call. Some of your listeners may know about a resort called Atlantis. It's a big resort in the Bahamas. It's on Paradise Island. They have 6,500 employees. It's massive
Mhm.
and be one of the more premier in all of the Caribbean. I get a call from their head office there. They wanted to meet with me. Like that was unusual. I never partnered with them in any
Yeah.
way. So I drove over there and they valeted my car. I thought, wow, that was pretty cool. And up the
Yeah.
elevator, I went to the top floor and
Yeah.
walked in the door and the big office. Here's the Bahamian general manager standing there, suit and tie.
Okay.
And I go to shake his hand, John. It was a little strange. Went to put my hand down. He didn't shake my hand.
Okay.
That's kinda weird, in
Right?
any
Yeah.
country, that's weird,
Yeah.
but it just caught me off guard. He says, "Before I shake your hand, I have a
Right.
question. What's your question?" He says, "May I call you Uncle Randy?" You know? And there I thought, well, right away now, somehow I've had an effect on
Right.
this man over the years, because in the Bahamas, that's what they call me Uncle Randy going into school. So he knew me as that name.
Yeah.
And, I shook his hand, John, and then sorry, I get a little emotional over this, but it was a very precious moment. He took his glasses off
Mm,
and he said to me, he says, I know you're wondering why I invited you here.
mm,
He says, but I want you to know I accepted Jesus
mm.
as Savior at Adventure Learning Center as a young boy. I came out with my school class and I accepted Jesus. And I always want to thank the person that started. I never had a chance to do that. And I heard you were back on the island and I wanted to tell you that. Wow. And then there's a door knock and a lady walks in.
Mm.
She walks up to me, shakes my hand. Hello, Uncle Randy. I said, hello. What is your name? And she told me,
Yep.
and she says, it's great to meet you again. You don't know me, but my daughters have been volunteers for you at the center during your summer program
Wow.
while you've been out on the ship.
Yeah.
She says, but I accepted Jesus as Savior as a young girl in my elementary school when we came to visit the Adventure Learning Center. She
Wow.
says, I worked in the U.S. Embassy for 20 years, and now I'm the vice president of Atlantis. So here you have two top people
Right.
of Atlantis saying thank you, and let's make this happen. We need this back on the island,
Amazing.
And by
Right.
December, we did do our Christmas lights program, no animals. It was a drive-through. We had 7,000 people come through. It had become over the years, just something. It's a tradition at Christmas. You go to
Right.
the Christmas lights drive-through
Yeah.
because they share the gospel and whatever, and that's what they did, and they came by the thousands.
Wow.
So anyway, that's just kind of a quick update. But yeah, we started that in early '90s.
Mhm.
The Bahamas government, the prime minister, actually gave us a piece of it's called Crown Land.
Okay.
They said, if you do what you say we're going to do, we give you the deed. So we acquired the deed within 2 years of that. And then we got more land. We got wetlands in the back and put up a floating boardwalk observation deck. And right when we opened in '93, a missionary from Canada down the road who was operating a camp on 10 acres, just
Mm.
literally 4-minute walk, 500
Yeah.
feet down
Yep.
the road is a 100-bed camp. He walked down and said, are you interested in the camp? I said, yes, I'm interested. He said, are you really interested? How much are you asking? And he says, how can I take money for what God has provided? We're not asking any money.
Wow.
So, John, this is what I did. I literally stood in front of him and I said, let me pray about that. I bowed my head and I lifted and said, I'll take it.
Right.
God's already answered.
Yeah.
So he puts a clump of keys in my hand on a plane to Canada. Next day, didn't see him for 2 years.
Wow.
So
Okay.
we have a two-part ministry. It's Adventure Learning Center. It's the altar education. We have Adventure Learning Camp, 100-bed camp. The
Yeah.
center is really the heart of the ministry.
Mhm.
It's where we invite around 10,000 students a year,
Mm.
and they come to the center for a one-day field trip. So it's like your kids are going on a field trip somewhere. They would come to the center for an all-day trip.
Right.
And we pick them up with our bus. We give them a meal. Depending on the grade, we have grade-specific curriculum that they're learning in the classroom,
Okay.
but we couple it with the gospel. We
Yeah.
couple it with biblical truths.
Right.
And that's why these people come to faith in Christ. So we
Mhm.
have a lot of animals. We've had nature trails, floating boardwalk. The planetarium is
Right.
more kind of for the older students.
Yeah.
And can you imagine sharing the gospel using the wonders of the sky?
Mhm.
It's really overwhelming. We have staff that are facilitators, teachers that take a group of 6 or 8 and they have them for the day, kind of like their camp counselor.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we meet under the pavilion and we do a puppet show. We share the gospel with the kids.
Mhm.
And we see a lot of souls.
Yeah.
Names get put in the book of life. It's quite. And then we do summer programs. We do family fun days,
Mhm.
Easter fun day. We have the Christmas drive-through. We have wacky water fun day. So the parents come back with the kids. I mean,
Yeah.
it's something everybody knows in the Bahamas, and
Right.
we can't wait for it to restart.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's one piece, and the other is the camp, and we do a lot of local churches come for overnight retreats. 1 week roll out. There's 700 islands in the Bahamas. 40 of them are inhabited,
Yeah.
so they come in and stay at the camp. We also have Christian universities
Mhm.
from the States come. do mission trips,
Yeah.
churches, whatever, all kinds of groups, mission discovery. So the ministry is kind of different, but it feeds one another.
Right.
I think is the best way to say it. So,
Yeah, for sure.
so that's kind of where we're at with that,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I remember we got to visit the Bahamas while we were on the ship, and yeah, just remember the guest of honor. I forget what her role was in the country, but she also, had a clear memory of her experiences at the Initial Learning Center and the impact in her life. And yeah, I remember you telling it about that before we got there, just how many of these children, and now they're grown up, of course. And yeah, it was just so incredible.
Now the kids and the grandkids are coming,
Exactly. Yeah.
It's generational. It's quite amazing.
Generations now. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about where it is right now.
Well, it was shut down. The government actually shut it down for 2 years at COVID. So that was the beginning of the end in a sense. And after that, going into 21, 22, it just sat vacant. There was nothing there. No one cared for it. And that's when it really went down. And, in the Caribbean, things grow and vegetation and whatever. You just got to keep things that they mold. And then when the lights aren't on and the power is shut off, then people come and steal. They stole all the equipment, sound equipment. They stole engines out of our staff cars. They took the welder. They took our backhoe. They took all the tools. Everything you can imagine was taken of value. Appliances, everything was stolen. All the animals were taken. Bills weren't paid. I mean, phase 1 was just paying back the bills that had to be. Phase 2 was just getting it de-weeded and cleaned to find out what needed, and then fitting it back to where we could do Christmas lights drive-through by the end of the year, and then pushed on to get the planetarium open. That building structurally was all good. Replace some equipment, get some extra staff. And so we did open that in March. And that's why I can joyfully tell you 900 people have gone through that program. So the planetarium is back, but now we're in phase 3, going into phase 4, replacing animals, getting we have a barn, a nature center, the back trail, the train that we take kids on, all that has to be repaired. Animals have to be replaced. It's a much bigger piece. We just found someone who wants to donate solar, which we pay a lot of money for electricity. And now we find out to put solar on, our roofs are 25 years old, 30 years old. So we can't put the solar on until the roof is done. So now, there's another 100,000, So we have things like just challenges like that.
Yeah.
We need staff. We've always had international staff, missionary staff. We have local staff that we pay, but you have to have income to be able to pay them. So it's just kind of in that in between. But we're grateful where we're at. We would like to start the elementary first, 2nd grade program this fall is what we're shooting for. Ordering new puppets and all the curriculum is ready to go. So the curriculum is ready.
Yeah.
We've had work teams in repairing. We still need work teams. So we've repaired the barn, the fences, the doors that got kicked in, but we still have a long way to go. Animal enclosures all need new latches, and some need some new roofing and that type of stuff. So plumbing, electrical, carpentry, that type of thing. So that's got a long list of that. So that's kind of where we're at. We'd really hope to have a summer program, but just couldn't quite pull it off. You need people and equipment to do that. So, so we're shooting for this fall for the kind of the phase 4 opening of the lower elementary program.
Great.
But camp is open. Camp never closes, So if someone is interested, they could look it up on alcbahamas.net, alcbahamas.net. And both ministries are on there. Get some pictures.
If there's someone listening to this and they think, hey, I've got some of these practical skills, I might be able to come down and help out. They could just reach you, I guess, through the website and see what that would look like. Now, could individuals come on their own, or are you really looking for, like groups or teams? What sort of works best to come?
We've had both. And, we have skilled and unskilled. It is, if you know how to clean and how to paint a fence, you're good. But if you know how to fix a toilet, a sink, some electrical issues, we've got work for, we got pretty much something for everyone. And we've had couples come in just for 2 weeks at a time, just husband and wife that are retired, and boom, put them up and off they go. But then we've had, teams of 20 as well. It just depends.
No, that's great. That's
I
great.
actually have an urgent need. Maybe I'll make it known to you, but
Yeah.
June 8th to the 14th, that's at like second full week of June. I know it's not a great week, but we ordered a refurbished, big, large playground. It's time after 30 years to replace what we have.
Wow.
And we have an installer company called Kids Around the World. It's a ministry. That's what
Okay.
they do.
Yeah.
And they're coming in to install it, and they need some help together. And so we'll have a coach there,
Okay.
but anyone who can come in that week of like Sunday the 8th and the next 4 or 5 days after that.
Right. Okay.
I'm just getting the word out. So anyway,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
don't know
No,
when
that's
this will
great.
launch, but
Yeah.
let you know.
Yeah, definitely. Who knows? Someone listening may be able to jump up and be a part of making
Sure.
that happen for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah. And yeah, I'm super excited to see it back in action and coming back online properly. That's really, yeah, I know it's an amazing impact there on the islands. And yeah, so thank you
Yeah.
for all you're
Yeah.
doing. I'm glad you're back involved and helping spearhead that and really
Yeah.
the resources needed to make it happen. So,
I was just thinking, John, ironically, we were on our way I was actually directing the ship on our way to the Bahamas, and then COVID hit. So they
right.
put me the COVID director on the ship, but we're on our way to Bahamas and cancel that. But
Yep.
this October, the ship is coming back. So it'll be
Right.
in Nassau,
Okay.
where Adventure Learning Center is, ironically. So we're looking forward to that kind of a double ministry.
Yeah.
Very
Coming back
interesting.
together. Yeah. That's really cool. Yep.
Because
Well,
that's where
Randy,
I met the first ship, the
yeah.
first one. The actual logos came in Nassau. That's how old I am.
Okay. That must
Yeah,
be a little while back.
back in the 80s, late
Yeah.
80s.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, something I always ask of my guests is just how you would describe missions from your experience. And
mm,
I know you'll have a fresh perspective on that. But yeah, if you'd like to give insight from your own experience, what's that
yeah.
look like?
Yeah. Well, I would just say this because I travel and speak about this a lot.
Hmm.
Mission is very different than what people understand it to be in the church.
Right.
Church people, if I can say that, they pray for missionaries, they give to missionaries, they go visit. But mission is far more than just Uncle Randy standing on a street corner with a talking bird. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I've actually never done that. I've done it in classrooms and that, but people think you got to have a Bible degree or you got to have some kind of good degree to do that, or you have to be a preacher or have to be able to answer all the tough questions in the Bible. That
Right.
is so far from the truth. In fact, in the world that we've served in many of the least reached, unreached parts of the world, you don't get into big theological debates. That's
Sure.
not your purpose for being there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I think like you and Holly are like the perfect example. You know what I mean? Uh, you used your skill in the communications department. You were the director of communications on board. Well, there you go. You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to answer all the Bible answer. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But you just use the skills that you have, and they're needed all over the world right now on our property. We just have all kinds of needs for different types of people, IT and electronics, whatever.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to stop that myth of thinking. Number one, you got to be educated, or you got to have a degree in something, or you got to really know everything about anything. It's really not true at all. It's really not true. It's amazing how many like college student groups we bring in. And
Right.
John, I won't mention any names or any kids' names, but it's amazing some of them don't know what end of a shovel to use before
Right.
and then you teach them and then they learn it, like
Yeah.
it's not that difficult. So, but number one, I think, just know that you're needed all over number two, just God leads the faithful.
Hmm.
Just be faithful to his call on your life and then he will guide you, you know, it, it just, it almost works that easy. Now,
Mm.
some churches don't have mission programs, so that's unfortunate. But there are, of course, many ways to find out where in the world can I get involved in mission. And
Right.
being that
Yeah.
we're on this podcast here,
Yep.
you and I can answer that question. But just know that. And then number three, I mean, it really is God's call on your life. It is this little thing that goes off in your soul that says, God's leading me to do something different I don't know what it is or where it is, but I'm going to take that next step. I'm going to go talk to the pastor. I'm going to go to the mission conference. I'm going to go talk to someone, and just make this thing known that I really have a passion to serve. I don't know how it happens and when it happens, but I've never found like the same missionary testimony ever.
Yeah.
They're all so unique and all so
Definitely.
different.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I think a very high degree of missionaries I meet have done a short-term mission trip. They've actually took a week of vacation or two from their work, and they've gone on a trip somewhere and thought, wow, I can do this. I can do this. It's possible. So short-term missions trip, I think, is one of the most valuable experiences. Sign up. Anyone who's listening, sign up and just go on a trip.
For sure.
And you'll find out that there's so much need.
Yeah, and I think those short-term trip, in some ways, probably the biggest piece of that is just getting out of your own comfort zone, your own known experience. Especially if you can go internationally and see another part of the world and get a real firsthand experience of what it can be like somewhere else. And I think for those of us living in the United States or another, what we would call a Western country or whatever, it can sometimes be really shocking to see the difference in other people's experience and what their day-to-day life is like. And so I think that's something that can be really powerful to challenge us, even if it's just to be more grateful for what we do have. But hopefully in turn allows us to be generous with what, God's blessed us with to help others and be a part of taking the gospel to the world.
Exactly.
Now, Randy, I know your story hasn't all been easy, and I know you've shared kind of your own personal family journey in those early years in the Bahamas. And I think that's maybe something that would be helpful to hear, because so often, it starts even sometimes as, well, I'm Christian now, God's going to just make my life perfect. And then you sort of think, well, I'm going into mission, so I'm giving up a lot of stuff. So surely God, he's going to make it all smooth. But the reality, we both know, well, we know God doesn't work that way. And part of our journey sometimes is very difficult. And so, I think it might be interesting just to hear that piece of your journey and what the Lord showed you over many years now since then.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for asking, because we can butter it up pretty good.
Yeah.
But life is really no different than the normal world that everybody lives.
Yeah.
Everybody has tragedy of some kind, or things don't go the way they thought it was going to be, or, some call it spiritual warfare, and it is. There's no question there's spiritual warfare. I think in anyone's life, that's all part of it. But I mean, our journey, well, we weren't down there very long, and I actually packed my motorcycle on a DC-3.
Okay.
And flew in and was riding my motorcycle, got hit by a taxi driver. I got knocked unconscious. I had a helmet on, split my helmet wide open, but I'm knocked unconscious laying on Bay Street in Nassua, Bahamas, almost died. And then 2 years later, our Ashley, our second daughter, she started seeing backwards and tripping and stopped talking and like, what's wrong here?
Yeah.
So we took her in and found out she had plagiocephaly. Her skull had fused prematurely. So she had infant skull surgery. She's got a scar from ear to ear. They took the whole front lobe of her skull off.
Yeah. Wow.
Rearrange her eye and put it back on, like as missionaries, you're like, wait a minute, God, we didn't sign up for this,
Right. Yeah.
And then there were fires. We had fires down at the center, and we had all kinds of things. But I think, of course, the most poignant was the day, it was actually Good Friday, that kids were off of school. We took them down to the center. And we were going to go to the beach that day. We didn't do that often, but this was the day to do it because we were all off, and went down to Adventure Learning. We were building a planetarium at that time, and kids would always go play in the playground. And they did. And Kim and I went for just a short meeting to the planetarium, and I turned over their 3 daughters, to one of the staff there. And we were there about 10 minutes, came back from meeting, walked through our petting farm. And there in the pond, in the fish pond, was our daughter, our youngest 2-year-old daughter, was floating in the pond. And, living there now again, and we walk past that 10 times a day, that same pond is still there.
Right.
She'd been just left, and we put little ducklings on the pond that day, and we're sure no one was there to watch. It was all enclosed, all fenced in, but she was left alone inside the fence, and she probably went in to pet those little ducks. But anyway, long story short, she went home to be with Jesus that day, and it started with a ambulance ride to the hospital trying to revive her. And and two funerals, one in the Bahamas. And that same lady, it's interesting, John, that you mentioned, she was the Governor General, first female Governor General of the Bahamas, was a guest speaker for the ship visit. She also called and said, "May I speak at your daughter's funeral?" Like, isn't that amazing? Like, usually you ask people,
Right.
and she did. It was a very precious moment, Governor General.
Hmm.
And had two funerals and then came back to 7 court hearings. They wanted to prove that we didn't poison her,
Wow.
purpose driven, and it was a very, very difficult time of her life. And you can't put it in words. And
Right.
only a parent who's actually lost a child like that would know what you go through. And of course, you come to question God, like, is this really it? Like, thanks a lot.
Right.
You have every feeling you ever can imagine. But what we also found out was that it was the most amazing time of our life where people were actually watching how we responded, how we did life. We went back to church that same Sunday after. We went back to work. It wasn't easy, yes. I wept in my car all the way to the center, wiped the tears off, get out, go to work. Wept all the way to pick up the kids after school.
Yeah.
A lot of weep, all of that. There's no loss of that. But
Right.
and we didn't act it out, but we just believed early on that this was no mistake, that God allowed this to happen. And I could take another hour of your time and share other God stories related to this. Because I tell you what happened 48 hours after she drowned. Both of our parents flew in. We're sitting around my table in Nassau, ready to give thanks for the meal. The phone rings, and it's Dr. James Dobson calls me. I never talked to him in my life.
Right.
Didn't know who he was. He got my number. Somebody called him, and he calls him. He says, "Is your wife there? Can you sit on a call? I want you both to be on the phone." And he rattled off 10 things that are just about to happen. He said, "This is about to happen.
Wow.
And if you don't do this, this, and this," he says, "I'm not going to preach at you. I'll pray for you when we're done.
Okay.
You don't do this, you will be divorced in 2 years, an 80% divorce rate in child tragedy." Like, wow. John, I took those 10 notes and I have them right here in my phone.
Okay.
And I have shared those with other families. This happened 25 years ago, but it still feels like yesterday. But I've been able to share these with families who've lost their children in one way or the other,
Right.
and people still talk about that. There's many, many other stories, but that's where we say you never get over that. You get used to it. You just get used to it. That's what it is. But God actually blessed in amazing ways as a result of that. It was quite overwhelming. Man, we stayed with the ministry another 10 years after that,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'm sure that speaks volumes too, like you're saying, you're observing, and and I know too over the years since, it's like, I think you sort of mentioned that, but it's given you opportunities to really speak into the lives of other parents who have lost a child, and so I think it's one of those things. And it's easy for me to say I've never had that experience, but the Lord uses these tragedies, I think, to give a platform and to allow you to minister to other people too. And amazing how he works even in those horrible circumstances. So, but praise the Lord. He's a good God. Whenever I think of you and Kim, that's always,
think of it.
that comes to mind.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, John. I really do.
Just seeing the way you've lived your lives, with that reality as a part of it. So sorry. Now I'm getting a little emotional. So thank you for the example you've set over all these years, and in my life in particular, and clearly as we've talked here in the lives of so many others through your journey. As we wrap up, I don't know if there's anything else that comes to mind that you'd love to share with someone who's listening, maybe someone who is kind of thinking, is this mission thing for me, or how you might advise someone in that position?
Yeah, well, I would just close it with 2 things. One is, when you feel that little nudge, don't let it pass. Just talk to somebody, talk to your mentor, your best friend, someone, and just say, you know what, something's happening here and I don't know what to do with it. I think that's very important, because what will happen is the enemy will grab that moment and say, no, just stay here. You're safe here. You're going to make money here. It's home. Get that out of your mind. That's what will happen. The enemy will seize that. So I would say move forward with that little inside call. And the last thing is, I always liked D.L. Moody, quite an amazing man from Moody Bible Institute. He's got a lot of great quotes. But the morning after the Chicago fire, he preached the night before And that night, a lot of people died in Chicago fire, and even people in his church.
Okay.
And he got up and he thought to himself, never again will I preach without sharing the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And he has this little quote. He would say, preach the gospel to yourself every day.
Mm-hmm.
For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. Whoever believes in him will not perish with everlasting life. I often use that little verse.
Yeah.
But just think about that. God loves us, has a plan for our life.
Amen.
And everybody out there that doesn't know him needs to know him.
Right.
Like, just preach the gospel every day. So that's my little last encouragement.
Thank you. And yeah, Randy, thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation. Always an encouragement to catch up with you and just hear some of your stories. And thank you for being a part of this. And I hope this will be an encouragement to our listeners. And
Great.
God bless you as you move forward with all he has ahead for you with Adventure Learning Center and your role with the ships.
Thank you, John. Very honored and love to come back someday and tell some more stories.
We'll look forward to it. All right. Thanks, Randy.
All right. Blessings. Bye for now.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mission Chats. It would be such a help if you just took a moment and gave this podcast a rating on the podcast platform that you're listening to it. That would just really help get it out a little wider to more people who might be interested in this kind of content. Thanks so much.
Find us online at missionchats.com